Episode 5, Nixon's Secret Plan, Vietnamization and the Expanding War. By 1969, the Vietnam War had dragged on for nearly a decade, and the American public was losing patience. Protests filled the streets, support for the war was at an all-time low, and the US government needed an exit strategy. That's when Richard Nixon stepped in with a new plan, one that he claimed would bring peace with honor. His strategy, Vietnamization. Instead of keeping US troops in Vietnam, Nixon's plan was to gradually withdraw American forces while training and equipping the South Vietnamese army to take over the fight. On paper, it sounded like a way to win the war without losing more American lives. But in reality, Nixon knew the South wasn't strong enough to hold off the communists alone. So while he publicly talked about pulling troops out, behind the scenes, he expanded the war. Without telling the American public, Nixon secretly ordered the bombing of Cambodia and Laos, two countries next to Vietnam that were being used as supply routes by the North Vietnamese. This operation, known as the Cambodian Campaign, was meant to destroy enemy bases, but instead it widened the war, fueled more anti-war protests, and destabilized Cambodia, eventually leading to the rise of the brutal Khmer Rouge regime. Meanwhile, in Vietnam, US troops were still engaged in some of the war's bloodiest battles. The My Lai massacre, where American soldiers killed hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians, was exposed, further turning public opinion against the war. Trust in the US government collapsed, and more Americans demanded an immediate withdrawal. By 1972, US troop numbers had dropped, but the war was far from over. Nixon had hoped that Vietnamization would make South Vietnam strong enough to survive on its own. But North Vietnam had no intention of stopping, and a final massive offensive was coming. In the next episode, we'll cover the Christmas bombing and the Paris Peace Accords, Nixon's last desperate attempt to end the war on American terms. Was Vietnamization a real strategy, or just a way to save face while losing the war? Let me know in the comments. Follow for more episodes on the Vietnam War.